Order. Business statement. The Leader of the House, Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by apologising to the Shadow Leader and to the Honourable Gentleman, the Member for Perth and North Perthshire, that this statement is later than it normally is to ensure as full information as possible for the House. I understand this has caused some travel arrangement difficulties, and that is a matter of regret. The business for the week commencing the 9th of September will include Monday 9th of September, if necessary, consideration of Lord's amendments, followed by debate to approve a motion relating to Section 7 of the Northern Ireland Executive Formation Act 2019, historical institutional abuse, followed by a similar debate for victims' payments, followed by, under the same Act, a debate on human trafficking, followed by a further motion under the same Act on gambling, followed by a general debate on a motion relating to Section 3.2 of the Northern Ireland Executive Formation, etc. Act 2019, followed by, if necessary, consideration of Lord's amendments, followed by a motion relating to an early parliamentary general election. The House will not adjourn until royal assent has been received to all acts. A message may be received from the Lords Commissioner, and I will return to the House on Monday with further information if necessary.
Valerie Vaz.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Leader of the House? I was going to say it's the usual custom and convention to thank him, but I appreciate that he's apologised. At least I abide by custom and conventions. And I do want to thank the Leader, actually, for being vertical when he gave that business statement. Mr. Speaker, I just have a couple of questions on that. On the Northern Ireland legislation, the opposition will cooperate with the government to make sure that that legislation gets through. And obviously we are keen to see the Lord's amendments, if there are any, come back to the House to be debated on the European Union withdrawal bill number 6. I wonder if I could ask the Leader of the House, when he was in his response, to say exactly what the motion is relating to the early parliamentary election, if it is a similar one under the Fixed Term Parliament Act, and when he's likely to table that motion. I raised the case previously of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, as I said I would do every week. Could he update the House on her case as things have taken a different turn? And also those of the other UK nationals who are in prison, Kamal Farougi, who was detained in May 2011, Anousheh Ashouri, who was detained in August 2017, and British Council employee Aras Amiri, who was detained in March 2018 and has now been given a 10-year sentence for visiting her grandmother. I have to say that I asked the previous Leader of the House about the Queen's speech, and I know that's been thrown back at me a number of times, because we have had the longest continuous parliamentary session since the Acts of Union 1800, Mr. Speaker. There was hardly any business legislated while the government at that time was going through a leadership election. The government chose to have a longer session and no legislation was progressing, despite me asking for that and opposition days, which I haven't been given. And we should have realised something was going to happen when a question was asked about when would the trade bill come back. And I think the Leader responded in these terms. He said, why would we want to do that? That should have given us a clue. Now, we've got a number of bills that are coming that are stuck. The immigration bill, the agricultural bill, the fisheries bill, the financial services bill. Now, we know they fall when Parliament is prorogued, but not statutory instruments. They're still live. So could the Leader of the House say what he plans to do, what the government plans to do with those bills? I asked the previous Leader of the House, the Honourable Member for Devon Central, whether we could sit during the conference recess, and we on this side were ready to do that. Mr. Speaker, there is nothing conventional about the government's plans for prorogation. Whilst most prorogations last a few days and take place just before the Queen's speech, this is 5 weeks. It will be the longest in more than 40 years. But I want to ask the Leader of the House if he could clarify what he said yesterday during the debate. He didn't answer when asked whether he knew that the House was going to be prorogued on the 16th of August. In fact, he said he was at Lord's. So I will ask it again. Did he know on the 16th of August, when he was at Lord's, whether the House was going to be prorogued, whether he had seen that email? 2 weeks later, he was on a plane to Aberdeen Airport. When was he told he was going to Balmoral, and when did he know what was in the proclamation? Mr. Speaker, the reason why we don't trust this government, and they take their lead from the Prime Minister, because he says one thing and does something else. He wrote in a letter to all his colleagues when he wanted to be the Prime Minister, he said, "I'm not attracted to arcane procedures such as the prorogation of Parliament. And I'm a one-nation Conservative," and yet he has prorogued Parliament and he has withdrawn the whip, possibly sacked, possibly expelled some of the most honourable and right honourable members who have given great service to their party and to their country. And now we face the fact that the right honourable member for Orpington has resigned and no longer wants to stand. The Prime Minister's own brother can't take it anymore. And that's why we don't trust the government and the Prime Minister. He secretly agreed to suspend Parliament 2 weeks before denying it would happen. He is treating Parliament, democracy and the people with contempt. 22 law professors have written an open letter and said the prorogation is clearly designed to evade scrutiny, including legislation and preventing MPs from asking key questions on EU negotiations and no deal planning. So, what were the reasons for the prorogation at that time, without recourse to coming to the Chamber and explaining it? Mr. Speaker, an important bill was passed yesterday and it's making its way through the Lords. It stops a no deal. And here are the reasons why that is an important bill. The Director of the CBI has said no deal is a tripwire into economic chaos that would harm our country for years to come. Is that scaremongering? The General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress said no deal would be a disaster for working families. Is that scaremongering? The President of the National Farmers Union said you will have many farmers going out of business. Food and Drink Federation has warned it would inflict serious and in some cases mortal damage on the UK food and drink industry. Is that scaremongering? The British Medical Association has said in their report dangers of a no deal could lead to the disintegration of the NHS. The fashion industry, worth £32 billion, said no deal should be avoided. The Incorporated Society of Musicians said no deal Brexit will incur major disruption to the music industry, worth £4.5 billion. Are they scaremongering? Guy Verhofstadt, coordinator for EU Brexit, said the only people who will prosper are the wealthy bankers and hedge fund managers who have bet on chaos.
People like you.
I think the Leader of the House also owes an apology to Dr. David Nicol. He was part of the Operation Yellowhammer. When will the Leader of the House publish Operation Yellowhammer? Or does he think the government are scaremongering? Mr. Speaker, they're like the wolves of Whitehall. They're marauding over our customs and our conventions. It's absolutely outrageous the way they are destroying them. And actually, the Prime Minister only governs by custom and convention. I think the Leader of the House also owes an apology to Mr. Speaker. I think he was heard on air to say that Mr. Speaker was wrong. But I want to remind him of his bedtime reading, Erskine May, of the dedication that is compiled by some of the officials, both past and present. And it says this: the Speaker of the Commons and in the Lords and all the Commonwealth speakers, on whom fall the great responsibilities of guardianship of the parliamentary system. We saw that this week, and we thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me deal with the last point first, because I would not have dreamt of saying that you were wrong. I made the point, the classic point, that you have not eyes to see with nor lips to speak except as directed by this House. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, that that is what you do properly, and you have consistently taken the view that the House should be able to debate what it wishes to debate, though I will confess that sometimes, if I were in your position, I might come to a different decision. That is not in any sense disrespectful to Mr. Speaker. But let me come to this panoply of questions that we've had. First of all, I thank the Honourable Lady for supporting us on all none legislation and looking forward to the Lord's amendments. The early parliamentary motion will be put down tonight, as it needs to be before the close of business, and the very important issue that the Honourable Lady raises every occasion on Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, The Foreign Office is doing what it can. It is a very difficult situation. It is so important that the Foreign Office, in all these consular cases, and the Honourable Lady mentioned a number of them, is as vigorous as it can be. In my view, the statement made by a former Prime Minister, Lord Palmerston, in the Don Pacifico affair is the right approach for governments to take in defending the interests of British citizens abroad. We should be incredibly robust about it, and I believe the Foreign Office is doing as much as it possibly can, but sadly we cannot tell other countries what to do. We then come on to the Queen's speech, what's going to happen with the bills that are stuck. The bills that are stuck will come unstuck because they will fall on prorogation. That is the sort of de-supergluing process that we are able to use. And I'm glad to tell the House, that all the bills that are needed for leaving the European Union on the 31st of October are in place. And then we come into the diary questions. What was I doing? The ability to leave on the 31st of October, all the legislation that is needed is in place. And we've had 580 statutory instruments to make sure it will all happen smoothly. So that is all done, it is ready, it is prepared. Her Majesty's government has been a model of efficiency and efficacy in preparing this, and my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, is perhaps one of the most impressive administrative ministers this country has ever seen. I was asked questions about my knowledge of the next Queen's speech. The Honourable Lady is aware that one of the main duties of the Leader of the House is to prepare for the next Queen's speech. That is what you do, that is what you're briefed on from the very beginning. Bids for items in the next Queen's speech come to the Leader of the House. So that has been part of my briefing from the point at which I was appointed, and that is the reason why this session is coming to an end. It has gone on for far, far too long, as the Honourable Lady rightly pointed out, as indeed did the Honourable Gentleman, the member from Rhondda, who seems to be fidgeting at the moment in an uncharacteristically fidgety way.
How does one fidget in an unfidgety way? The Leader.
Mr. Speaker, your knowledge of being able to fidget is so extensive that I'm sure you will be able to tell the House or make it a chapter in your memoirs in unfidgety fidgeting. But that is the straightforward reason for the prorogation. The prorogation is taking place to have a new Queen's speech, to set out the really exciting one-nation policies that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, wishes to set out. Mr. Speaker, I know, we all know, because we've heard you say it many times, that however much chuntering there is from the other side, you will make time for me to answer all their questions, which I am looking forward to with eager anticipation. But I will be better able to answer them if they wait their turn, rather than making noises imitating a farmyard that I cannot translate because I'm not Dr. Dolittle. Only I were Dr. Dolittle, life might be easier. So that is the routine part of my responsibility, and that was why Parliament has been prorogued. And I would say about the conference recess, at the last occasion I appeared at this dispatch box to answer these questions, I raised the issue of the conference recess. And sitting opposite me was none other than that really distinguished figure, the leader, the chief whip of the opposition party. And not the honourable gentleman who is there, the chief whip. And when I said we would have the conference recesses, the chief whip nodded. And as we all know, a nod from the opposition chief whip is like the nod of Zeus. What it nods at is done and is viewed as authoritative. So let us have no questions about that. And then the Honourable Lady came to scaremongering, and the Honourable Lady seems to wish to compete to become the scaremonger-in-chief. The preparations have been made, they are in place, and they have been done with remarkable efficiency. But yes, a lot of Remainers wish to make our skins crawl. And I'm afraid it seems to me that Dr. David Nicholl is as irresponsible as Dr. Wakefield. What he had to say, I will repeat it, is as irresponsible as Dr. Wakefield in threatening that people will die because we leave the European Union. What level what level of irresponsibility was that? But what I would say, in conclusion to the Honourable Lady and to the House, is that this government has offered them the opportunity, if they don't like what we are doing, to seek an election and put themselves to the voters. But they daren't do that. They are frightened of the voters, and all they wish to do is obstruct democracy.
Pull yourselves apart.
Sir David Amis.
My right honourable friend find time for a debate on the future staging of party conferences. It seems to me that these conferences have changed out of all recognition and could easily be held in future over a long weekend.
Sound question. I'm even more delighted than usual to have called the honourable gentleman so early. These are meetings of voluntary organisations which could perfectly well take place over a weekend. The idea we should be away from our main place of work for this sort of indulgence will strike very large numbers of people across the country as bizarre. The Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, I wondered if you were going to suggest a job share. Perhaps I should sit in Speaker's occasion and you should answer questions as Leader of the House. But I'm sorry to say that I have a slightly different answer to my honourable friend, that party conferences are an important part of the political process, and I'm really glad to say that this year's Conservative Party conference is going to be primarily an occasion for members, and we are going to get back to putting members front and central, because they are the people who select us and for whom we work and who campaign for us. So I think party conferences are important, and that it is a reasonable time to have that this House has not been that busy, it has to be said, earlier in the session, and therefore having a party conference is perfectly reasonable.
Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Leader of the House, Esquire, for announcing whatever this is supposed to be for next week. And can I say to him, if he's starting to feel a little bit tired, just feel free to have a little lie down. But perhaps if he's going to do that, maybe mention it to his honourable friends from Pudsey and Horsham, if he's going to lie out once again. So according to this, there will be another attempt at a general election on Monday, and if you could just confirm that. And it looks almost certain that straight after that it's the government's intention to suspend democracy for that 5 weeks, contemptuously suspend democracy, much against the desires and wishes of this House and the people that we're elected here to serve. But can I congratulate the Leader of the House on what has been an incredible week, not for becoming an internet sensation with his Victorian dad lying down stuff, but in his shrewd and stellar and steady management of the House business. He's managed to lose every single vote for this Prime Minister. No Prime Minister has ever got off to such a terrible start. He's managed to lose his government majority by deselecting decent and honourable members of his own party who have served their country and party with such distinction. He's lost control of the business of the House, and last night his unelected lords down the other place put up the white flag to what they call the surrender bill. And even in the last few hours, we've had the resignation of the Right Honourable Member for Orpington and his desire to spend less time with his family. Mr. Speaker, there's only one piece of business that the Right Honourable Gentleman craves, and that's to secure his general election while still being able to get the no deal that they crave. And to his great frustration and to the Brexit cult that occupy these benches, they've been unable to get away with it. His general election is coming, but everybody has to be certain that their no deal is dead and buried. And the funniest thing about last night, Mr. Speaker, during that general election motion, was the sight of Scottish Conservatives trooping through the lobby in favour of an immediate general election on a day that an opinion poll showed that they'd be decimated in Scotland. Mr. Speaker, if you want to see a demonstration of slavish loyalty to the no deal Brexit cult cause, you need look no further than these honourable gentlemen. This isn't just turkeys voting for Christmas, it's turkeys lathering themselves in cranberry sauce and shoving the stuffing up their own posteriors. I've got a feeling, though, Mr. Speaker, that this probably will be the last chance that we'll have the opportunity to see the presence of the Right Honourable Gentleman in his place. He wanted a legacy, Mr. Speaker. How about the least successful Leader of the House that we've ever had?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful, as always, to the honourable gentleman for his characteristic charm. And Mr. Speaker, what we have seen today is, I think, in history unprecedented, unknown, unseen. We have seen a frightened Scotsman. That people who are known for their courage, their forthrightness and their sturdiness, and they are scared of going in front of their own voters. They have run away from an election. They are, what is it, timorous beasties, I think they must be called, Mr. Speaker, who dare not face their voters. And I just wonder whether this is because of the narrow majority that the honourable member for Perth and North Perthshire himself has, and that he parades it as concern for Conservative members. He is worried that they may be in danger. But surely, if that is what he really thinks, he should be embracing this opportunity for an election, should be pushing forward for it. And he mentioned, as the Honourable Lady did as well, my right honourable friend, the member for Orpington, who has decided to leave Her Majesty's government. This is something that we know about across the country. Families disagree on Brexit. My enormously distinguished, wise and good sister, Annunziata, has gone and joined the Brexit Party, and not only joined it, but got elected to the European Parliament. So we all have, within our families, these disagreements over an issue that is of fundamental importance to us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, is of fundamental importance to us all. And that is why it is right to put this back to the British people in a general election so they can decide, and so that the honourable gentleman can restore the honour of the people of Scotland by showing he is not afraid.
These are richly enjoyable exchanges. That would ordinarily be the case in the presence of the Leader of the House in any circumstance, but I believe that it is more so because, unless I am much mistaken, the Right Honourable Gentleman is not the only Rees-Mogg present and observing our proceedings today, and it's a great pleasure and privilege to welcome little Moggs, in particular, of whom there are several, and other members of the Rees-Mogg dynasty. Notwithstanding that joy, one of the responsibilities of the Speaker is to safeguard the rights of members in respect of business to follow. And I make that point simply to underline the imperative of brevity from back and front benches alike, in observing that exceptionally today it may not be possible for everybody to be called on the business statement. We will do our best, and the quest for brevity can be led, I think, with distinction by Dr. Julian Lewis.
May we have a statement or debate on the circumstances of the seizure of a British flag tanker by Iran in the Gulf, but if there isn't enough time for that, would the Leader of the House have a word with the Secretary of State for Defence, because the Defence Committee on Monday has a session planned, but the former Secretary of State, the Right Honourable Member for Portsmouth North, has so far not yet received the information she requires from the MOD to enable her to give testimony to us.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is a matter of the utmost importance, and I shall certainly ask my office to contact the Ministry of Defence. It is only right that select committees should get the information that they require.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Leader of the House for the statement and for his apology. I was considering the delay in the normal timing of the business statement this morning, and I was wondering if the Leader of the House was carrying on his normal practice of having a lie-in. And I'm just wondering if the Leader of the House will be aware, though, that with prorogation, if prorogation happens, that the Backbench Business Committee ceases to exist and has to be reappointed, re-elected. And therefore I will be writing to the Leader of the House with a list of as yet unheard debates, should any time become available after prorogation or possibly after a general election. And they include debates on women's mental health, which is vitally important, the role and sufficiency of youth work, which we've heard so much about recently, diabetes services with targeted prevention strategies, the 50th anniversary of the Open University, and parental mental illness, with the impact on children's outcomes. So it's a list of things which are important and still need to be aired. Also, by the way, if prorogation does happen, there is also an opportunity or an application in for a debate about Baby Loss Awareness Week, which happens from the 9th to the 15th of October every year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I take this opportunity to thank, on behalf of the whole House, the honourable gentleman for the wonderful work he does, Backbench Business Committee, and in ensuring that the House gets to debate those issues which are at the forefront of its mind and that Parliament functions effectively, and to take very seriously what he has said about the debates that may come up after an election or after a Queen's speech that require attention before the Backbench Committee has been reformed. As to my recumbent position, can I assure him my office is drawing up a position paper for me and is also coming up with a recline to take?
Sir Edward Lee.
We have indeed had a panoply of questions, apart from the obvious one. When the motion on the early general election is considered at the end of Monday, will the bill that the House of Commons passed yesterday on ruling out no deal, will that have received royal assent? The reason why I ask this is I distinctly heard the Leader of the Opposition say yesterday that once this bill became law, he would vote for an early general election. And would my right honourable friend agree with me that it would be quite extraordinary if after this long session of Parliament, which is clearly deadlocked, it would be extraordinary if every member of Parliament, at least two-thirds, did not vote for an immediate general election and put this to the people?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is indeed an adult Parliament and is not able to get things done, and the conclusion my right honourable friend draws is correct. In terms of royal assent will be given speedily once the bill has completed its passage through the House of Lords and back to us if necessary with any amendments. I obviously can't predict what their lordships will do, but if it completes those stages, it will receive royal assent and it will receive it speedily.
Single sentence inquiries. Jessica Morton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the government's disgraceful proroguing of Parliament, not only will honourable members not be able to scrutinise ministers on Brexit, I also will be robbed of the opportunity to call for a debate and press ministers following Tartel's announcement that Orb Steelworks in Newport is proposed to close. What will the Leader of the House do to facilitate a debate so that we can all fight to save our steel industry?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There simply wouldn't have been time for these debates anyway, because we're about to go on the conference recess. We are losing 4 or 5 days of parliamentary time. And there will be a new session, a fresh session, a session full of interest and excitement, and the opportunity for debates on a range of issues.
Mr. Speaker, MPs across Staffordshire are very concerned about news that, school transport provision will not now be available for those that have to pay for their school transport due to a ruling about the disability regulations. I don't want to go into the technical details at the moment, and I appreciate time appears to be short, but I wonder if the Leader of the House could find time for a debate on this important matter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think it is an important issue. I have a nasty feeling it's some tiresome EU regulation, so after the 31st of October we may be free to deal with it ourselves.
Mr. Speaker, city airport consultation plans propose an additional 110 flights a day, many of which would fly over my constituency. We're already faced with noise and air pollution from the aircrafts, and given we're in a climate change emergency, can we have an urgent debate in government time about airport expansions?
City Airport is a fantastic airport and very convenient to use and very well run, but I understand that people have concerns about the increase in number of flights from airports. So I understand the issue that's being raised, and the honourable lady knows that there are many opportunities of getting debates, adjournment debates, backbench business debates, once Parliament has come back in October.
Tom Tugendhat.
Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend agree with me that we need an urgent debate in this House about planning? What we have seen recently is delays in various planning authorities, particularly the planning inspector, reviewing planning applications. This leads to the 5-year lag in planning, meaning that unapproved or groups of applications that are not part of the planning process from the Borough Council are being put in, and this is particularly affecting areas like the monastery and the nunnery in West Malling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm always concerned about anything that may affect a monastery. But on planning debates, obviously if we have a Queen's speech, we will have the normal days of debate after the Queen's speech, where I'm sure it will be possible to raise the important issue of planning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Jess, my constituent, was heavily pregnant when her husband was stealing from her account. She went to the bank. They said because she'd given him the PIN that was acceptable. The police had no legislation to support her. Kirsty Ferguson was married. They had homes. When they divorced, he refused to sell them against court orders. She was pushed into penury and stress and emotional distress. What can we do now that the domestic abuse bill is going to fall? What are we going to do after prorogation to support these women, not just in Batley and Spen, but around the country?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The issues that the Honourable Lady raises are of fundamental importance, and I think all of us as constituency MPs have had similar cases come to us, and the Prime Minister is fully behind the domestic abuse bill. I can't tell you what is going to be precisely in the Queen's speech, but I think I can give a steer that it would be a great surprise to all of us if this bill were not revived very quickly, because I think the concern the Honourable Lady has is shared across the House.
Single sentence. Henry Smith.
May we have a statement from the Health Secretary on when NHS England's new Genomic medicine service will be fully operational?
Thank you.
I will certainly pass that on to the relevant Secretary of State.
Alex Norris.
Mr. Speaker, it was tangible all summer, the hunger throughout communities like mine and across the country. Voluntary sector organisations are stepping in to feed our children. Why is the government not doing more? Can we have a debate about feeding our children in hot...
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for that point, that the government carried out a pilot scheme of feeding 50,000 children over the summer. That scheme is being evaluated and it's going to be considered whether it should be rolled out more widely.
Luke Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for Salisbury and the Treasury Bench previously made a statement saying there was a debt owed to equitable life victims. Can the Leader of the House explain when we would have some time to further debate this issue and make sure this debt is repaid?
Grateful for the Honourable Gentleman. The equitable life issue really ought to have been finished by now, but of course it is an issue of concern to many members and many of our constituents, and I was a part of the equitable life APPG, so I share his concerns.
Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is happening in Kashmir is an outrage, and the UK government must do everything it can to bring around lasting peace, stability and to restore human rights to the region. So can we have an urgent debate in government time on the crisis in Kashmir?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady. I understand this was covered very fully in Foreign Office questions, and the Foreign Office is taking this matter with the utmost seriousness, and the ability to debate it will of course come through with the Queen's speech debate.
James Rakenshire.
Will my right honourable friend ask a Transport Minister to come to the House to make a statement on the future of the South Eastern train contract? The franchise arrangements, the competition has now been cancelled, and my constituents are keen to see the benefit of new trains that a new contract would deliver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will pass on what he says to the relevant Secretary of State. Problems with trains always beset this House, and I fear if we debated them all, we would never have time for anything else.
Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, I was alarmed to hear reports that the Leader of the House has in the past suggested that all council workers should wear bowler hats, that Somerset should have its own time zone, that he has apparently met a group favouring voluntary repatriation of black immigrants and has disputed climate change. Mr. Speaker, does he still believe these things, or has he finally decided to live on planet Earth?
The Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, the first half of that question referred to jokes, and the second half of that question is wrong.
Thank you. Raymond Chishney.
Speaker, Medway Hospital Radio has raised a real concern about hospital radios being able to get appropriate licensing from Ofcom, preventing patients from getting access to radios in hospital. That can't be right. Can we have an urgent statement or a debate on that, please, Mr. Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hospital radio is very important to cheer people up in hospital, and actually is a very good training ground for people who have careers in radio. I think it is more suitable for an adjournment debate or a Westminster Hall debate than taking time in the chamber.
Andrew Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the House has been extremely coy about when prorogation will actually happen. He hasn't announced that it will be Tuesday or Thursday. So if the general election motion falls again, will prorogation be extended so he can have a third go?
Mr. Speaker, The Privy Council determined that a commission should be established under the Lord High Chancellor and under the Great Seal should be able to prorogue Parliament on Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. Parliament will be prorogued according to a decision made by that commission. That commission has not yet made its decision.
Bob Blackman, single centre.
On Indian Independence Day, families were attacked outside the High Commission by thugs.
Shame.
But on Tuesday, more thugs stoned and pelleted the High Commission.
Shame.
Can we have a statement from the Home Secretary or a government minister on what actions can be taken to protect those diplomatic areas of our society for our allies and friends?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I was unaware of that, but it is deeply shocking that so close an ally should have its representative office in the United Kingdom attacked, and we should take every measure to protect the offices of all embassies in this country as part of our diplomatic obligations, but particularly those of friends, and it is a matter that I'm sure the Foreign Secretary will take most seriously.
Is the Fixed Term Parliament Act motion on Monday under the Fixed Term Parliament Act or another mechanism?
The motion will be put down, as I said earlier, later on today.
Mr. Speaker, the world's third largest sporting event will be taking place in Japan later this month. That's the Rugby World Cup, which wouldn't have taken place without the exploits of a certain William Webb Ellis in my constituency back in 1823. The town will be celebrating, so can we treat that as an opportunity to have a debate on the economic benefits of sporting events?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My general view of the world is that everything good that has ever happened started in Somerset. Though I have to confess that in the case of rugby it started in the Honourable Gentleman's constituency, which I cannot claim to be part of Somerset, and that I know that... The Honourable Lady says from a sedentary position she's sure I'm well. I think it would be too geographical a stretch for me to do. But it is a fantastic sporting event, and I know that many people will enjoy watching it, and that absolutely we should encourage people to participate. Though, Mr. Speaker, I think your predilection is for tennis and mine is for cricket, so there are many sports people may be interested in.
Marion Fellows.
Mr. Speaker, the Post Office network is in crisis. There's a government contract due to expire in November which allows asylum seekers access to cash through post offices. Can we have a debate in government time on the number of government contracts that could be used to increase revenue for postmasters?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had a postmaster come to see me recently in my constituency surgery on this issue, and I know it is one that concerns many members and the wonderful work that is done by post offices as part of their community, but the Honourable Lady knows how to ask for debates in the many mechanisms that there are.
Rachel McLean.
As my right honourable friend has a great deal of personal experience of paternity, as we see today, does he agree with me we must have an urgent debate on the return of maternity services to the Alex Hospital in Redditch, as demanded by my constituents?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do indeed attach great importance to paternity and indeed to maternity services, and I think it would be an entirely suitable subject, though this is of course at your discretion, for an adjournment debate.
Alan Brown.
Speaker, in January 2019, the High Court ruled it's illegal for the DWP to make universal credit deductions to people who receive two pays within the payment assessment period. When's the government going to make changes to comply with the law?
Her Majesty's Government always complies with the rule of law. It is a fundamental principle of our Constitution.
Fiona Burris.
The Charity Commission has asked abortion provider Murray Stopes, a charity largely funded by public money, why it paid its head £434,000 last year. Can we have a debate into the high levels of executive pay in the charitable sector, described as an issue of public interest by its regulator?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is indeed a matter of public interest, and it is quite extraordinary that a charity should be paying somebody so much more than the Prime Minister earns, or even more shockingly, than Mr. Speaker pays paid, when he stays in his seat for hour after hour in a very diligent way. And I think if Mr. Speaker were paid on an hourly rate, he'd find he was getting less than if he worked at McDonald's. It is very impressive. But I do... I'm telling you... The honourable gentleman, the member for the Rhondda, will have to catch your eye in due course before we run out of time. But I share my honourable friend's concern. It is a matter for the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, but charities must report on the number of staff paid more than £60,000 in income bands in their annual report and accounts, and the Charity Commission has asked Mary Stopes International to provide an explanation of its CEO's quite extraordinary salary.
Yes, Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid he's not in his seat anymore, but the Right Honourable Member for Old, Bexley and Sidcup previously in this government promised £90 million to refuge funding that would be in the next comprehensive spending review. I note this week that not a single penny piece was given to refuge funding in the comprehensive spending review, so I find it difficult to know what to believe when it's being said in the dispatch box now. Will he today commit to me that that money that was promised and planned for and the domestic abuse bill will appear in the Queen's speech?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The general principle is that if commitments have been made to spend money from this dispatch box, those commitments are incumbent upon the government and they were taken and they continue. However, I cannot guarantee spending commitments. I'm not the Chancellor of the Exchequer, in case the Honourable Lady hadn't noticed. I share her concern that it is a very important issue, and if it satisfies her, I will write to the Chancellor of the Exchequer to clarify.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my constituents in North Hykeham suffer from dreadful levels of travel congestion. Indeed, several hundred of them responded to a recent survey on the subject in my area. The North Hykeham Relief Road is a key part of solving this problem. Could we have a debate on that subject, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I know my honourable friend has been an amazingly effective campaigner for better transport in her constituency and is tireless in it. I think she probably doesn't want a debate so much as the money. A debate may be easier to find sometimes than the money.
Wrap up this session by 1:40, so much briefer questions are now needed. Barry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the House has got a big family, as I have. There's a woman in Tehran, in Iran, who can't see her husband and can't see her little daughter. When the House is not sitting, why doesn't he lead, would he lead, a delegation to Iran? I would be with him, an all-party delegation, to go and see if we can get that woman released.
You're on that delegation, the Leader.
Mr. Speaker, this is a matter for the Foreign Secretary. I can't constitutionally interfere in the Foreign Secretary's business, but I completely share the concern. If Mr. Speaker were to lead a delegation, I think that would be very powerful, but I do hope you'll make sure you get back.
Well, on the principle that members always speak the truth in the chamber, I have to assume that the Right Honourable Gentleman is sincere in what he's just said. Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the Chancellor's desk since last July has been a short list of candidates to succeed Mark Carney as Governor of the Bank of England. Is he aware of the Chancellor's plans to make a statement on whom he has recommended be appointed so that the Treasury Select Committee might scrutinise this appointment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not aware of the Chancellor's decision or the timing of the Chancellor's decision, but as a former member of the Treasury Select Committee, I think it is of the utmost importance that the Select Committee carries out proper due diligence and scrutiny of appointments that is hugely beneficial to the good running of the country.
Stephen Doughty.
Mr. Speaker, well, the Leader of the House clearly thinks we're all born yesterday because we're not going to fall for trickery around a dissolution motion of any sort that allows him to crash us out with a No Deal Brexit before the 31st of October. So why doesn't he publish the motion now so that we can see it? Can he answer whether it's amendable and when is he planning to table it?
I'm very grateful for that question, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman has just said he expects his party to lose the election because the party opposite not only has it passed a surrender bill, it's now decided to surrender as a political force. Because what we have just heard is that they don't think they can have an election on the 15th of October. Why? Because they would lose. If they're so confident that they would win, they can win and cancel Brexit, which is their real purpose. But they don't trust the people.
Sir John Hayes, a sentence.
Speaker, there's barely a life in this place or beyond in our constituencies, perhaps through family or friends, that hasn't been touched by cancer and its treatment. And you, Mr. Speaker, and the Leader will know the critical relationship between detection, diagnosis and definitive treatment. So will the Leader of the House arrange for either a statement or debate on early diagnosis? It will assuage fear, prevent pain and hopefully stop people dying.
This is a matter of great importance, and one where actually debates can be very useful because they help raise awareness. And so I'm sure the honourable gentleman, the chairman of the Backbench Business Committee, will have heard that request. Though may I point out that £34 billion more is going to be provided for the National Health Service, and I'm sure some of that will be used to improve cancer treatment services.
Brian. I gather the government thinks it may need to invoke the Civil Contingencies Act after the 31st of October if we leave without a deal. That Act presumes that Parliament is sitting. Is it not therefore vital that we do sit through the 31st of October? Yeah. And will he make sure that the motion is published as soon as possible, before 2 o'clock, so that we can all decide what we're going to do on Monday?
Mr. Speaker, there is no question of the House not sitting around the 31st of October. Nobody has proposed that.
Hugh Merriman.
Mr. Speaker, will the government support and give time to cross-party calls for the financial service industry to provide or maintain at least one free-to-use 24/7 cash point machine to every high street that supports 5,000 residents?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend had a 10-minute rule bill on that subject, and he may want to introduce a similar bill in the new session, or go into the lottery for a private member's bill, which could give him a great deal of time to discuss it, but I share his concern about ensuring people have access to cash.
The closure of the bank branch in Brora means that shortly we'll have only one bank branch in the whole vast county of Sutherland. Can I request, please, humbly request a debate in the government's time about the continuing closure of rural bank branches? I've asked for this before, but in the lingua franca, tempus omnia habet, sed dum sparo spero.
I'm glad that the honourable gentleman is breathing and hoping, which is always extremely beneficial for all honourable gentlemen and indeed all honourable members, and right honourable ones too. Honourable members, I said. That includes... And all honourable members. I thought members included everybody, but anyway, I do apologise if it didn't. The point is an important one, but I don't think government time is likely to be the right arena. Also, I may be to some extent partial, representing a rural constituency, and I don't think I should advocate debates in my own cause.
Ross Thompson.
Mr. Speaker, during the summer recess, I met the wonderful international volunteers at Simian Care in my constituency. So can we have a debate which celebrates and recognises the important role of international volunteers in our communities so that charities like Simian can flourish?
Well, can I first of all congratulate my honourable friend on the amazing charitable work that he does, because I know he has great personal concern and is very supportive of his local charities. Again, I think it's suitable for a backbench business debate, and that my honourable friend knows the form for making application for those.
Paula Sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Leader agree with me that it's about time we had a further debate or a statement from government regarding the women who have been affected by the state pension increase? It's OK for the Leader to lie down on the job, but many 1950s-born women are being forced back into work by his government or face poverty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by thanking the honourable lady and the honourable member for Rhondda for their very kind words last week when a protest was proposed outside my house. I was very grateful for that and for their bipartisan approach. I think we all have a concern that members' houses should not be affected, and I'm genuinely grateful. To come to the issue she raised, it is a very serious one, and I have great sympathy for the WASPI women. It is difficult for them, but the situation we inherited in 2010 in terms of the public finances necessitated it, and though I am not unsympathetic to a debate, I very much doubt the decision is going to be changed.
I very much endorse what the Leader said about the Honourable Lady, the member for Dewsbury, and the Honourable Gentleman member for Rhondda. I've made that point myself before, but I take the opportunity to do so again. People who have political disagreements with public figures should not demonstrate in a way that causes real anxiety and fear either to that member, that public servant, or to members of his or her family. That is intolerable. Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could we have an urgent statement on UK government support for the people and government of the Bahamas in their very difficult situation at the moment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department for International Development has sent a team of experts to help deal with the devastation and destruction caused by Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas. The team of humanitarian experts are working with the Bahamas government to assess the situation and provide support. The Department for International Trade, along with the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Defence, are monitoring the situation and getting support to those who need it. So the government is doing whatever it can, but my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this issue.
Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, constituents are contacting me regarding proposals for a breeding kennel in Blaenau Gwent. Many residents have emphasised the importance of good animal welfare. So can we have a statement from the government explaining what action is being taken right now so dogs get the best possible protection in the future?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know this is an issue that concerns many people, and the government has a particular concern for animal welfare. In the new session of Parliament, there may well be time to have a debate on it.
Hugh Gaffney, sentence.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Royal Mail Group are trying to sell off Parcel Force as a separate business. Communication workers will be ready to strike and take action. With an possible election coming up, will there be a statement from the government?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that no responsible person would go on strike to interrupt the democratic process of a general election.
The Plaid Group will probably be voting against the government on Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday, but wouldn't it be reasonable for the official opposition to have the courage of their convictions and do likewise?
Mr. Speaker, what has happened to the men of Harlech? I thought they were meant to stand steady, and instead they're running away from an election. This is very disappointing.
Ian Murray.
Mr. Speaker, a small family-run restaurant in my constituency was hit with an eye-watering Home Office fine for a minor administrative error in their staffing. I don't want a debate or a statement, but could you please get me a meeting with the Home Secretary so I can ask her directly to resolve this issue and why she hasn't responded to my letters?
I'm sorry to say, Mr. Speaker, that arranging meetings is not the job of the Leader of the House. I'm here to organise debates, to point people in the right direction of getting parliamentary responses, not, I'm sorry to say, to be a diary secretary.
Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
Will the Leader of the House assure me that during purgation the Home Secretary will not lay down a statutory instrument to make it illegal to enter Kurdish Syria so we continue to be able to support our allies in Kurdistan?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The rules relating to the laying of statutory instruments when the House is sitting are complicated and detailed, and without knowing the precise form of the statutory instrument, I would not be able to give any guarantee.
Jardine.
Thank you very much. We've recently learned that free movement, as we know it, is to end on October the 31st. During the referendum campaign, the current Prime Minister made a great deal of decisions not being made without the democratic agreement of this Parliament. Can we be assured that in the current circumstances, the biggest change to immigration in this country in a decade will not be made without the approval of Parliament?
Oh, Mr. Speaker, let's have an election. Let's let the British people decide. Stop running away from it. Not you, Mr. Speaker, but others in this House. It is so ridiculous to say that this government is outrageous and it's undemocratic and it's shocking and it's terrible because it's offering an election. An election gives the choice to the British people and validates whatever we do.
Clive Efford.
If the House agrees to an election date on the 15th of October on Monday, the Leader of the House is very knowledgeable about procedural issues. Is there any device that the Prime Minister could use to move that date to be on the 31st of October whilst the House is prorogued in order to take the country out with no deal?
The date of the election flows from the date of dissolution. No, it's not. The election follows 25 working days from the date of dissolution. And therefore, if we are dissolved on Monday, then, but that is done, the process for that, no, it's not, that's a mistake. It is not a minimum once the dissolution day is set. It is 25 working days from dissolution. No, what the Honourable Gentleman is confusing is when the day of dissolution is set, and that is done by royal proclamation. But what I can assure the House about is that the date will be set and the date will be stuck to. I think everybody in this House wants to see this issue settled. It is the one thing we have agreement about. And the best way to settle it is through a general election, and a general election before the 31st of October.
West Reading.
Doesn't the Leader of the House understand that such is the lack of trust in this government because of its behaviour that we simply will not vote for a general election unless and until an extension of Article 50 has been secured, guaranteeing this country cannot be dragged out with no deal? That's the condition.
Mr. Speaker, the condition seems to change, because the condition was that the legislation was passed. Now, if and enacted, given royal assent, given royal assent is the point at which it's enacted. It's what becomes an act. Now, if that is the law of the land, that will be the law of the land. And if members think it through, the government would not want an election after that law had taken effect and we'd had to ask for an extension. The last thing this government wants to do is to ask for an extension. Therefore, then win an election. That's the easy part of it. If you really have confidence in what you say, then go for an election. That is the obvious point. And this weasel wording that we get to try and pretend they want an election, but they don't want an election and they're not going to vote for one because we might leave, is all about stopping Brexit by people who don't trust their own voters.
Jim Shannon, one sentence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In July of this year, there was a number of attacks upon Christian villages in the Plateau state of Nigeria. 75 houses burnt, 3 Christians killed, a father and a son of 7-year-old, and the elder of the church, brutally beheaded. We had a debate in the chamber here back some 6 weeks ago, where we discussed the persecution of Christians and the True report. Could I ask the Leader of the House, could we have an update on where we are? Because the murders of Christians is continuing across the world.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very serious issue, and I share his concern for the persecution of Christians across the world, and we should do whatever we can, and indeed the government is doing what it can to help them. I believe the honourable gentleman met my predecessor quite recently to discuss the matter of freedom of religion and belief, and I know he is in regular communication with the Prime Minister's Special Envoy in freedom of religion or belief at the Foreign Office. These incidents are dreadful, and we must do everything we can to stop them, but I'm happy to take this matter up further if the honourable gentleman would like to write to me.
Alison Thulis, one sentence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There were 1,187 drug-related deaths in Scotland last year, but the Home Office is still yet to dispatch a minister to the drugs summit that the Scottish Government wishes to hold. Why?
Well, there is an issue as to exactly where power and authority lies within this, and what parts are devolved and what parts are not, devolved. But I will happily take this matter up with the Home Office for the Honourable Lady, and I will send a reply when I get a response from the Home Office.
Mr. Speaker, putting aside the vested interests of so many of this government members, relatives and chums in the other place, and in light of the work of the noble lords last night, could we have a debate in government time on the role of the upper chamber?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady may recall that we had a couple of days' second reading debate on the role of the upper chamber in an attempt to reform it not so many years ago, and it didn't get very far. The problem with those debates is that so many people have so many different ideas that nobody can come to a conclusion as to what ought to be done. So I would suggest that if people want such a debate, they have a word with the Honourable gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, 50 new towns were added to the Future High Streets Fund. Ellesmere Port wasn't one of them, which was hugely disappointing. But then I saw that the majority of successful bids were from Conservative constituencies. Can we have a statement, please, from the relevant minister to assure us that this isn't a political fix ahead of a snap general election?
Oh, of course it isn't a political fix. No government would ever behave like that.
Liz Twit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Tuesday this week, the Office of National Statistics produced the suicide data for 2018, showing an increase of 686 suicides over the previous year's figures. Suicide's preventable, not inevitable. So can we have a debate in government time as soon as possible on the figures and what we can do to reduce death by suicide?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is obviously a very important and worrying issue, and one where any policy initiatives that can be made to help reduce the suicide rate ought to be made, but I do think it's a suitable matter for the Backbench Business Committee.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. The East Lothian constituent, Erin Campbell, who is our member of the Scottish Youth Parliament, runs a Keep in Mind mental health campaign to reduce the stigma of young people's mental health and ask them to talk about it. If there's space next week, can we have a debate on the role of young people helping their own mental health through discussion and conversation?
Mr. Speaker, I think fitting it in next week might prove a little difficult.
Sangham Debonair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Leader of the House please apologise to the doctor who he compared an hour ago to another now disgraced former doctor whose actions and misinformation led to the loss of this country's herd immunity to measles earlier this year?
No, I'll reiterate it because I think this doctor's behaviour was disgraceful, and to scaremonger and to say that people are going to die because of Brexit is thoroughly irresponsible and unbefitting to his role.
Diana Johnson.
The Leader of the House is a stickler for good manners, except when it comes to members of the medical profession. But I wonder if he can help me. I wrote to the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge 76 days ago about the contaminated blood scandal and the fact that 19 people have died in those 76 days without receiving any compensation. Can he assist me in getting a response from the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge, which I can then pass on to everyone who's been affected by this scandal?
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Honourable Lady could send me a copy of her letter, because of course I will chase it up. But 76 days ago, my Right Honourable friend was not yet Prime Minister, and therefore, if she were to send it to me, I absolutely promise I will take it up and try and get her an answer as soon as possible.
Finally, Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Leader of the House confirm if it's a government tactic to cause reputational damage to experts such as Dr David Nicholl, who dared to challenge the government, or indeed raise legitimate concerns about the impact of No Deal?
Frankly, I think when people start saying people are going to die because of Brexit, their reputations are destroyed by themselves.
I'm extremely grateful to the Leader of the House and to colleagues for their brevity. I think there's a point of order, very briefly. Point of order, Margaret Greenwood.
Introduced a negative SI just 3 days before the summer recess for a pilot and managed migration to universal credit and payments to severely disabled people who lost out. Secretary of State said that the government had been advised by the Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments to use a negative SI, but my office has since been informed that the committee had not reported on the instrument in question and that therefore no such advice had been given. Mr. Speaker, could you please advise on how she could set the record straight?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for her point of order and to her for her courtesy in giving me advance notice of her intention to raise it. Ministers are, of course, responsible for the accuracy of their answers in the House, and I'm sure that the points made by the Honourable Lady will have been noted on the Treasury bench. It is open, of course, to the Secretary of State to correct the record if she thinks that that is the appropriate course of action. Moreover, and I think there is a salience about this, I understand that the Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments has been alerted to the statement made by the Secretary of State and will be writing to the Department about this matter. In light of that, I think we have to await the sequence of events, and people must draw the appropriate conclusions, both from what I've said and more widely. If there are no further points of order, we now come to the Select Committee statement. Mr. Norman Lamb will speak on his subject, colleagues, thank you, for up to 10 minutes, during which no interventions may be taken. At the conclusion of his statement, the occupant of the chair will call honourable or right honourable members to put questions on the subject of the statement and call the chair of the Science